Well, nobody knows where jazz is going because nobody has ever known where jazz is going. I mean, you couldn't possibly predict the swing era from the 20s or bebop from the swing era or avant-garde from bebop or fusion and on and on and on. So we don't really know where it's going. But I would say this. I don't think we're going to be seeing those kinds of distinct and discrete movements like swing, bop, and fusion. I think now it's a question of individuals. Now, one thing is important to remember is that in the early years of jazz, a lot of major musicians like Fletcher Henderson and Don Redman had, college educations and degrees and all of that. But a lot of the great figures like Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington, Charlie Parker did not. I mean, Armstrong didn't even go through high school. Hundreds, if not thousands, of major figures learned on the bandstand. That was their apprenticeship. Today, the apprenticeship of musicians is in the college orchestra. I mean, you're just not going to meet a musician who hasn't, got at least a BA and probably an MA and hasn't been to a music school and hasn't had giant steps as a homework assignment. So it's very different. So because they have this historical perspective, they aren't necessarily just coming out of whatever their generation is into. And also because they're growing up and they don't have the same prejudices against pop music that certain generations had, they can use that. So, today's musicians who maybe grew up with hip-hop may use hip-hop beats in a way that if you're not looking for them, you won't even hear it. But it's there. It's informing the way they think of rhythm. And they may use things that they picked up from Ellington or Dizzy Gillespie that isn't particularly obvious. It's not a homage. It's not a matter of playing Con Alma or Sophisticated Lady. It's just voicings or some idea that they picked up. So all of this becomes part of the brew. And what we're really looking for in the future of jazz is the individual who is saying something that expresses him or herself. That's what I look for. I look for some spark of originality or of individuality that sets this musician apart from the pack. The general level of musicianship in jazz is probably higher now than it's ever been. I can't get very excited about a musician who can do Art Tatum because I've got the Art Tatum records. I want to hear him take that and do something that hasn't been done. And there's enough of that going around that keeps the music very exciting. There's so many great young players coming out. I think we're in some kind of renaissance, especially in the rhythm section. I mean, where the musicians on drums and bass and guitar are really trying to figure out different ways to bring a rhythm section together. So, the crossover is a constant thing. One of the things we do in the book, which I think is fairly novel, I don't think anyone's done it before, but we have 2 chapters on fusion instead of 1. Everybody, when they talk about fusion, they usually are talking about the jazz rock thing that happened in the late 60s and 70s when Miles Davis recorded Bitches Brew and, Chick Corea and John McLaughlin, all these guys came along and had fusion bands using elements of rock. But we make an argument that fusion has always been part of jazz and that you can actually create a sort of fusion history of jazz. If you go back even into the 30s, where did Louis Jordan, the father of rhythm and blues, come out of? The Chick Webb Orchestra. Where did the salsa movement come out of? Michio and Mario Bava, who played with, and Dizzy Gillespie, who played with all the big bands. There's always been, Jelly Roll Morton said you can't make jazz without using certain elements of Latin music. So there's always been this, let me say it this way, I'll quote Dexter Gordon's famous line. He said, jazz is an octopus. It will take whatever it can use, and it will work with it. So I think the distinctions aren't as clear as we like to think. Jason Moran, who is the subject of the last chapter in our book, because we decided to use, instead of trying to cover the whole scene, we decided to use a representative jazz musician, at the age of 30, which he was at the time we were writing. And the 2 tracks we analyzed by him, one is his version of a 1930 James P. Johnson stride piece called You've Got to Be Modernistic, which he takes completely into the realm of thoroughly modern, semi-avant-garde jazz. And the other is Afrika Bambaata's Planet Rock, which he does the same. Now, anybody who knows the James P. number will recognize it. Anybody who knows the Bambaataa number will recognize it. But they will also see that he's done something completely different. And it's not a question of doing something clever or cute. This is what he grew up with. It's his right to use it. We're going to see a lot more of that.